Thank you very much, Johannes, for the kind introduction. It is a pleasure and a privilege for me to be with you tonight. I have a strong connection to the University of Arkansas. My father was a Razorback, my father-in-law was a Razorback, and one of the prized possessions in our family is a 1924 yearbook of University of Arkansas. Can you believe 1924? So I'm very lucky to be married to a Texan from Pampa, Texas. And she has a lot of relatives here in Texarkana on both sides of the border. Some live in Texas side and others live in the Arkansas side. But I'm very delighted to be with you tonight, and what we're going to do for the next moment is to take a road trip back in time and in space. In space, maybe 50 years back, in time 50 years back, and in space all the way to the other side of the world, where I was born in Cambodia when it was still under the French rule. Cambodia was under the French rule when I was born, and I was born less than a mile from this airport. So when you go and visit Cambodia, you will get to my village before you see the rest of the country. France was the symbol of modern civilization for us, for my generation. Everything was France, France, France. Until 1953, when Vice President Mrs. Nixon came to visit, then our teachers told us that there was another country, much bigger and farther away than France. It's called United States of America. I came from a law enforcement family. My father was a police chief. My brother was among the first to graduate from the National Academy, Police Academy, like the Quantico of Cambodia. Two uncles were police chief. But when my father died when I was 9 years old, my mother worked very hard to bring me up because she understood that education was important. She worked so hard that at one point she had to sell lotus leaves that were used in poor countries in the 50s to wrap produce where people bought in the markets every morning. She told me since I was at a very young age to never give up hope, no matter what happens. So she instilled in me that spirit of never give up hope. When I finished high school, I went to work for an airlines, and we flew all over Asia. We went even to China at the peak of the Cultural Revolution. What I saw in China was unbelievable. So it's empty street, empty country, empty everything. And I never thought that that revolution would reach my homeland a few years later. The Cambodians found themselves fighting a war against the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese, and then later on against the Khmer Rouge. I and my colleagues worked very hard to try to save the lives of hundreds and thousands of refugees and displaced people who fled the war-torn countryside to seek safety and shelter in Phnom Penh, the capital, and other provincial cities. On April 10, 1975, President Ford gave an address to the joint session of Congress. He said, for this administration, the time is short, and the options are very few as far as Cambodia and South Vietnam are concerned. When I heard that, my heart sank because I knew that the US was going to pull out and Cambodia and South Vietnam would just fall apart. 5 days later, in fact, this is April 10, 2 days later, I was told by the US Embassy to be at the embassy within 1 hour if I wanted to be airlifted out of Cambodia. The US was going to pull out, and I was given a seat in one of the helicopters. That morning, I had a meeting with the governor of a province where we had about 3,000 refugees to care for. We used to transport supplies, medical supplies and food supplies by road, but the road had been cut. cut off by the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese, and later by the Khmer Rouge. I thought that by going to the meeting, I would be able to save the lives of those stranded people. When I came to the embassy, I was told that the last helicopter had taken off 30 minutes before, so I missed the US helicopter by 30 minutes. 5 days later, the Khmer Rouge came in and they turned Cambodia upside down. They began to kill people who wore glasses, a sign of education. They killed nurses, teachers, businessmen, government officials, military personnel. They killed anybody who had not been with them during the so-called revolution. My mother gave me her wedding ring, her scarf, and a bag of rice. And she told me to run. No matter what happens, never give up hope. So I picked an old bicycle. I rode for 3 weeks, crossing Cambodia. I faked passes and I used false excuses to get through the Khmer Rouge checkpoints. I was captured near the Thai border, and they tied my arms behind my back and they were going to kill me. They suspected that I was trying to cross the border to Thailand, which was exactly my intention. But a truck driver whom I hadn't met a few days before saved my life. He told the Khmer Rouge that I was an innocent person wandering around looking for my family. So the next year, I was put in forced labor camps. The whole country was turned into a huge labor camp, into the killing fields. We were forced to work for 18 hours a day. We were given a bowl of rancid soup. At night when I went to sleep, I never knew if I would be alive the following morning. When I woke up, I said I would make it to freedom. In January 1976, they were looking for a crane operator. I knew they were going to use a crane to pick up timber found along the Thai border. That would increase my chances of escape. I never been in a crane in my life, but I raised my hand. I said I was a crane operator. So at night, I burned small candles, I pulled a blanket over my head, and I began to study instructions. That fact alone would have cost me the life if I were caught reading something in English. But I had no choice. There were only two kinds of people under the Khmer Rouge: those who had died and those who would die. So I took the chance. 50-50. On February the 13th, 1976, I was alone at the back of the timber truck. It looked like this one. It's very high. But I couldn't jump to the left because the Khmer Rouge would have seen me. The driver would have seen me through the rear mirror. I couldn't jump to the right because the Khmer Rouge soldier with an AK-47 would have seen me. So I crawled on top of the timber from the front to the back, and I just dropped myself behind the truck. As I was tumbling down, I was caught in a piece of lumber, and I was dragged for a few hundred yards before I was flung off. Then I began to run, to crawl, to swim, to walk for 3 days, having nothing to eat or to drink, and nothing to guide me through the jungle, except the sun, the moon, and the stars. I fell in a booby trap, which is a deep hole full of punchy sticks, sharp bamboo sticks. They were supposed to catch the unlucky victims at the stomach or the heart. But I'm tall for a Cambodian. So I was hit at my legs. I was severely wounded, but I wasn't killed. So I pulled myself out of that hole. I began to limp along until I got to Thailand. There I was jailed for illegal entry. And after that, they realized I was an innocent refugee, so they sent me to a refugee camp. In the camp, there were some 3,000 refugee families living in an area the size of a soccer field. It was hot, filthy, humid. Many suffered severe mental depression because they sat around all day feeling sorry about the past and worrying about the future. I thought I would do something to help out. I organized English classes. It was a win-win proposal because many of them were going to go to an English-speaking countries. Australia, Canada, New Zealand, the UK, the United States. They were able to get some basic English. At the same time, they were able to take their minds off the worries and the sorrows. On June 4th, 1976, 1 month before the bicentennial, I arrived in Wallingford, Connecticut. The first building I saw was a firehouse, because I took a taxi from New Haven to Wallingford, and the driver didn't know where I was going, so he stopped at the on the firehouse to ask for the direction. And this fire department looks still the same. 40 years later, it's still the same. The other day I went it just like that. But the scenery for my host family was unbelievable. This is what I saw in 1976. Nothing changed. If you have a chance to go to New England, you'll see that some of the scenery were just untouched. So there I was in Wallingford, Connecticut, in my new home with my mother's scarf, an empty rice bag, and $2. I was sick and tired, exhausted, but I was full of hope. I wanted to adapt myself to America so that America would adopt me. Adapt to be adopted. For those of you who speak French, s'adapter se fait adopter. Adapt to be adopted. So I did everything that came my way to the best of my ability. I picked apples in Wallingford. I ate a lot of apples, enough to last for a lifetime. Then I went to work for a fast food restaurant. I was to be trained to be a manager, but I had to learn how to cook hamburgers, scoop ice cream, wash dishes. I never seen a hamburger in my life. Suddenly I was hearing rare, medium rare. I was holding the lettuce, and the trainer said, "Hold the lettuce." It took me a while to understand she didn't want me to put the lettuce on the hamburger. I said, "This is very difficult." Next stop, New York, New York. I was in Manhattan in January 1977, cold winter day. I stood there at the corner of street in Manhattan. I saw all these huge yellow checker cabs coming down. Sign at the back read, "Drivers wanted." So I called, and they asked me to go and take a test. It's all about directions. How do you get from the Waldorf Astoria to Yankee Stadium? I had no idea where these places were, much less how to get from one to another. So I just checked the boxes. At the end, I brought the sheet to the examiner. He looked at the boxes, he frowned. He looked at me from head to toe, he shook his head, he sighed, and said, "You passed." So I became a taxi driver. In 1977, you didn't to know where you were going to be a taxi driver. You needed strong horn and good brakes. And I was amazed that New Yorkers could communicate in sign language. Sometimes with just one finger. I continued to do everything that came my way. I applied to a number of schools. They all turned me down because they had no transcript, except Columbia. They gave me a full scholarship. I did a Master of International Affairs. It's a 2-year program, but I did in 14, 15 months. Then I went to work in a few places, including Wall Street. And in the 80s, somehow my wife and I were introduced to the Reagans. And we kept on receiving invitations to the White House. But none topped this one on the right. It was on July 13, 1988. I was a guest of the President and Vice President of the United States at the Rose Garden. While I was standing there, the thought never crossed my mind that a few months later I would be working at the White House. In 1976, when I arrived, Dean Rutherford and I were just talking earlier on. When I arrived in 1976, there was an election between Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter. And I was watching TV with my host family, and I did not understand what was going on. I saw these people wearing funny hats, jumping up and down the chairs, screaming, shouting, and yelling. And my host family told me that these are delegates at the convention. They are going to select 2 people, and we are going to elect one of them to be the next president. Then they turned to me, they said, Sichan, if you wanted to understand this country, you should get involved. So my chance to get involved was 1988. After I became a US citizen in 1982, I cast my first vote in 84 for Reagan Bush, and then I volunteered in the Bush campaign in 88. After George Bush got elected, he asked me to go and work for him at the White House. And that was very unusual because there are, as you know, there are hundreds and thousands of people who volunteered in the campaign. But I was among the lucky few. I walked in to work at the White House on February 13, 1989, exactly 13 years from the day I jumped off that truck in Western Cambodia. That I made it that far in such a short time could happen only in America. Under President Bush, he said in 13 years, only in America. Under President Bush, the Cold War ended. Eastern Europe became free. The Soviet Union fell apart. Germany became united after the Berlin Wall came down. President Bush, 41, handled the post-Cold War world effectively without a shot being fired. And there I was sitting at the White House seeing history taking shape in front of my eyes only 13 years after I was running for my life. And that was a tribute to America and to President Bush. Working at the White House is very special. And being in the Oval Office is even more special. Being alone with the president is probably the most special memory that you will always cherish. There's so many things that he has said. This is the one that I remember the most. Any definition of a successful life must include serving others. In 2001, President George W. Bush sent me to the United Nations to be an ambassador there. And that's a special place for us because we have sort of triple responsibility. We co-founded the United Nations. We play host. New York is the world's largest diplomatic community. And we are also the largest benefactor to many United Nations programs. So it has been a privilege for us, for my wife and I, to work for 2 presidents. And I like to say that I worked behind the bushes. This was summarized in this book, Golden Bones, that Johannes mentioned. Golden bones are the terms that Cambodians use to refer to somebody who is very blessed, very lucky. I think we are all people of golden bones because we are blessed, we are lucky to be Americans, to be living here in the United States. And we got the writing bug, and we produced another book called Golden State, which is a political thriller. It involves the power struggle between the United States, China, Russia, and France, and the financial world. In our private life, we like to interact with young people. You recognize the Boy Scout. Was at the Bush Library at College Station. And this City Year, I think this is a program that President Clinton was quite involved from the beginning. City Year you are a City Year? Good for you. Bravo. So you correct me if I am wrong, but City Year is a program for young people up to 24, right? Up to 24, yes. Yes, to spend 1 year of their lives helping underperforming students, and I am very taken with that, and I've been speaking to their class, their core, what you call it, a few times already. And this is San Antonio. It grew up quite rapidly. It's somehow more than 100 core members in San Antonio. The one below is Civil Air Patrol. I was, after I heard President Bush said any definition of a successful life must include serving others, I went to join the Civil Air Patrol, which was founded in 1941 to provide aerospace education, cadet programs like this one, and also emergency services, search and rescue operation. And now we went on to be involved in Homeland Security. The Air Force Academy, we have been, Frank here was in the Air Force. And this is the message I always like to leave with young people. Be well, be wise, be worthy. Be flexible and able to adapt to difficult circumstances. Follow your passion. When you do well, don't forget to do good. While I was growing up in Cambodia, I studied the history and geography of the United States in French. At one point, I was able to name all the state capitals, all the presidents from George Washington to Johnson. And I studied their leadership. And you realize that the largest group of presidents were in the law. I think President Clinton is in there. In the law, the second largest was military leader, from Washington all the way to Eisenhower. The smaller group is the diplomats. I put Franklin there because he's the only American who was involved in all the, our historic documents, all the way to my former boss, George Bush. The last group is the greatest generation group. Yeah, and George Bush 41 is the last member. Of all these people, only two were pilots. George Bush and George Bush. Only one was a skydiver. So this is like what they say, just because you're an old guy, you don't have to sit around drooling in the corner. Get out and do something. Get out and enjoy life. America is never a conquering power. We transform the rubbles, the ashes of Europe and Japan into parliaments and prosperity. Our men and women continue to make the ultimate sacrifice so that others may have freedom. We respond to earthquakes and tsunami. We support refugees, the women and children. We improve health and education. We link people around the globe. We give voice to the voiceless. We are doing this because we are Americans, not to be popular. Because it is our duty to honor our country. Every night when I go to sleep, I feel blessed for having lived here in America, where each of us can have the right to dream and the opportunity to turn our dreams into reality, where each of us can have a happy home with faith, family, friends, and freedom. Thank you. God bless you, and God bless America.
Okay, we have time for a few questions for the ambassador. Anyone have your hand right back here? Yes, we'll get the microphone to you.
What happened to the wedding ring?
The wedding ring? Very good question. I was able to hide the wedding ring, my mother's wedding ring, for 1 year under the Khmer Rouge. I slit, let me show you. I slit my waistband here, and I put the wedding ring in here. For 1 year, I was able to hide it. The Khmer Rouge couldn't find it. But when I arrived in Thailand, in the prison in Thailand, they stripped me naked. They took all my clothing, my set of clothing on my back away, and 30 minutes later, they came back and threw the clothing on me, and the first thing I looked for was the waist, and it was gone. So it was stolen in Thailand. So I lost my mother's wedding ring, but she lives in my memories. Thank you for that question.
Any other questions? Yes. Here comes the microphone to you.
Were you ever able to let your mother know where you were?
No, I was not, because she was killed with the rest of all my family members. There were 15 of us, my brother, my sister, my brother, all their children, 15 of us were killed. I wrote an op-ed piece in the New York Times a few years ago called Last Breakfast in Cambodia, and it's posted on my website. I described the chaotic scene of the last few days before the Khmer Rouge came over. And 16 of us, including me, left that day when the Khmer Rouge came in, and I'm the only survivor. Unfortunately, my mother was also killed in that group. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes, we got one back here.
Thank you. Greetings, Ambassador. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Crystal C. Mercer. I'm a first-year student at the Clinton School, and I'm really interested about your experience at Columbia. Can you speak more to that when you got into that program?
I was very lucky because the one thing I learned from my mother: never give up. You know, after 10 schools turned me down, I just continued to apply. And in Colombia, somehow they set up a scholarship for students from poor countries. And I arrived the time that they were setting up that scholarship. So I was the first recipient of that scholarship. It's a very interesting program. It just turned 75 years, that program, the School of International Affairs. This is their 75th anniversary, and they have another program called International Fellows, where you have sort of interdisciplinary kind of department within the whole university. Anybody can apply for that. It's only a one-year program, so I was an International Fellows. And they have a lot of good internship. I've spent a summer in Samoa, in the South Pacific. So in my book, Golden Bones, I describe only 2 countries. One was a landlocked nation, Bhutan, which is a very beautiful country if you have been there. And the other one was an island, that is Samoa. They pronounce Samoa. And I consider my time at Columbia as the most important investment I ever made in my life. Thank you for that. A few years ago, they have an event called Alumni Authors Festival, and they invited me to give a speech, and my second book was presented at that event. Yeah.
Well, yes, sir. Got a question back here.
Ambassador, thank you for your remarks and coming to Arkansas. Two things. One, I was curious if you'd ever return to Cambodia, and then also, as an ambassador to the United Nations, what kinds of things were you able to draw from your experiences to make a difference in the world?
The first question, Dean Rutherford and I were just talking in the other room. I went to Cambodia the first time after I escaped in 1992, when I was still at the White House. We just concluded a 2-year conference in Paris to find a comprehensive peace settlement for Cambodia. And the United States is a member of the Security Council. We had a very important role to find a lasting peace solution, and we decided to send a delegation to Cambodia. I was invited, and I went on. It was quite an emotional return for me, because 16 years later, I was running for my life in the jungle on foot. And then in 1992, I was returning as an assistant to the President of the United States in a government aircraft. It took me a long time to recognize things that I've known since my youth, like my high school, my national library, and so on and so forth. But it sank in after like a day and a half. So that was my first visit. In 94, I took my wife there, and we've been there a few more times. So she was able to familiarize myself with my own culture, just like I am familiar with the Texas culture. I have to tell you that when I was growing up in Cambodia, I watched a lot of Western films in French. And one day, my wife, Martha, and I met Miss Kirk Douglas in Washington. So I went to him, I said, Mr. Douglas, I am a big fan of yours. I watch all your movies, but I never knew you spoke French. And he said, I didn't know it either. Yeah, your question about being an ambassador to the United Nations, because of my background, I was able to interact quite well with the ambassadors. I spoke French to the French-speaking African ambassadors. I spoke Spanish to the Latin American ambassadors, and also the Asian ambassador. We get along very well. The Asian, they like to sing, so they have a monthly meeting called karaoke. So each ambassador would go, and then each of us was required to sing a song. And when I arrived in New York, the chairman of the Asian ambassador was a Brunei ambassador. And he said that, I know you are a U.S. ambassador, but you were born in Asia, so you're among us, and you're invited to our monthly meeting. And I have to say that I'm proud that I did not embarrass the United States of America. I carry some tunes in my pocket. Yeah.
Yes, sir, we got a question right over here.
Thank you. I'm Mike McWilliams, Ambassador. I was blessed a couple of years ago, 2014, to get to go to Cambodia.
Wonderful.
And got to visit the killing fields
Wow.
outside Phnom Penh.
Yeah.
Also to speak with a survivor who has written a book. I tried to find the book the other day, and I've hidden it someplace in my house. Your experiences as a refugee bring to mind the struggles that our country and all the European countries are going through right now with the refugees from the Middle East. What is the answer to this in your view from your experiences?
Well, I want to start at the premises that we are a nation of refugees and immigrants. Our ancestors came from Europe, and then there were more from Asia and somewhere else. Our motto is e pluribus unum, from many to become one. And that's very important. That is the foundation of our nation. However, since 9/11, and especially after the situation in the Middle East went into such a chaotic situation, it's very important for us to think of what I call the oxygen mask theory. The oxygen mask theory is on a plane, it's just like this morning when I came to San Antonio, put the oxygen mask before you help the others. So it's important for us to be safe and secure before you can order. I think everybody has to be vetted. I was vetted too. When I was in a refugee camp in Thailand, I was interviewed by the INS at the time. They called Immigration and Naturalization Service, INS officers. Have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? I said, no, I tried to survive the communists. So everybody has to be vetted. I think that's important. But we should keep our doors open because that's a very basic foundation of our nation. Yeah.
Well, let's first of all give a round of applause to the ambassador for being with us.
Thank you.